Hello guys, welcome to a new video, and this time we are going to talk about how to troubleshoot explicit proxy, especially talking about browser settings. We are going to be using the firmware version 5.6, and let's start. This agenda basically it's talking about 4 points. The first one is the basic concepts of proxy, each only one slide, the types of proxy using Fortigate, and when we talk about Fortigate we are going to say that we have implicit and explicit, and this is only about 2 slides. Then we are going to see the hands-on lab where we are going to be watching the diagram where we are going to be working. And after that, we are going to analyze the troubleshooting explicit proxy. As I said, it is about browser settings, okay? So the first point is basic concept of proxy. Is just to have the context of what is doing the proxy. And when we are talking about this feature, we can say that basically when we don't use no proxy, the connections are it's only one. In this case, we are talking about the source IP to the destination server, to destination service. In this case, it's only one connection. But when we talk about proxy, we are going to divide the communication. So this is going to be the source, the destination, and this is going to be the second source and the second destination. We are not going to see only one packet. I mean, these are advantages because we are going to analyze the traffic, we are going to inspect the packet. But on the other hand, the disadvantage is that we are going to take more time on the Fortigate or on the analyze that the device is going to take on. Okay, so basically this is the concept. No proxy is only one connection, and using proxy are 2 connections. Then we continue with the types of proxy using Fortigate, in this case implicit and explicit. We need to understand that if we talk about explicit proxy on Fortigate, we can talk about 3 basic points. The first one is explicit proxy to navigate internal or external services. On this case, it would be internet. The options that we can configure to use the navigation is browser settings, the proxy automatic configuration, the web proxy auto discovery. We are not going to talk about any of these features, just we are going to be talking about browser settings. The intention of this video is to do a full map of the proxy. As we can see, the other option to configure the explicit proxy on the Fortigate is the explicit proxy for authentication. On this case, we can talk about IP-based and session-based. Then we can say that explicit proxy are about addresses, and each one has the destination, the source, has different combination, URL pattern, URL category, and the combination of both, as well as host regex. The source can be talked about HTTP method, HTTP header file, user agent, and combination of 3. Then we can understand that there is implicit proxy. Usually some customers or some of us can be configuring proxy, but it is not an intentional configuration because we are going to talk about UTM profiles like using web filter, DLP, and antivirus. Sometimes if we configure the web filter as a proxy method, we can see that the Fortigate is taking more resources from PC or memory. This is because of the nature of a proxy. It divides the communication in 2, and it will be working more than the flow method. And this could be, and this can be called or named as a implicit proxy, UTM profiles. And the other thing is on the feature on 5.6, it's a new feature that we can talk about transparent web proxy. It would be the same as the browser settings, but in this case, the configuration on the end of the customer doesn't have to do anything else just to navigate. This is the idea of transparent web proxy. This is new feature on 5.6. And addition, we can talk about web cache. Even though we are going not to talk about this feature, I need to emphasize that on the cookbook or on other documents, when we talk about explicit proxy, the option of web cache sometimes is by default. And web cache is a feature that will help to optimize the connections when the user tries to navigate to internet, since the Fortigate will get or will save the HTTP header or the HTTP information so that it can reduce the time of answering the request. But this will not be covering. The intention of these slides is to do a map of what it is explicit proxy. On this case, as we were talking about, the color blue, it mentioned about the explicit proxy options, and in the color green, we can talk about implicit proxy. The color orange can be talked about web cache. So this is basically the map of proxy. The Fortigate. Additional, we can talk about forwarding the proxy, but we are not going to be considered that option into this slide. We are going to be considering this diagram. Well, hands-on lab, basically our lab environment will be consist of this. We are going to be using the Windows 7 with the IP address 10.0.2.131/24, and the gateway it's going to be the 10.0.2.253 with the port 8080. The network mask is going to be 2024. The firmware version that we will be using on the virtual machine is 5.6.3. The one interface, that in this case is port 2, is going to be 192.168.5.95/24. Then we are going to go to internet, and then here we can maybe do some connection, for example, youtube.com, google.com, maybe vancomer.com, or any web page that we want to troubleshoot or we want to see the connection through. Then it comes the more interesting of this video, that is the troubleshooting explicit proxy. We are going to go as faster. I am going to go slide by slide without stopping so much, just to check the full content. And then after that, I am going to go to the lab, and we are be checking all these options that on these slides contains. First option, the first troubleshooting, is to check the configuration on each web browser. In this case, let's confirm that we have configured the IP address of the gateway according to the port. In this case, we can see this is the option for Chrome, this is the option for Firefox, then this is the option for Internet Explorer. Basically, there are the same process. You enter two options, and then you look for proxy connections, and it's not hard to find them. Then there is a way to check the session list. Remember that there is two options that will be configured. In this case, we can set that the source to the firewall, the PC is going to be connected to the firewall, and also the firewall is going to be connected through the PC. The firewall is going to be connected to the destination server, okay, as we can see here. And after that, I mentioned here, then I explained the difference between between taking notice on the source and the destination, session status, and the ARP list. We are going to check it with more detail. And then after that, I mentioned the importance of looking through the documents on in this case, help.fortinet.com, and the importance of what happens if you are troubleshooting, for example, using Fortigate, and why we don't see logs, or why we don't see information through this, okay? Then I mentioned the importance to know the command show, the show full, and the command tree. And sometimes, even though it's not about troubleshooting explicit proxy, it is more just to identify the options that can be configured on each feature, not only explicit proxy, but also FCCO, wireless connections, or something else, okay? Then we understand, and we are going to see that using explicit proxy, when we apply the debug flow, it is going not to be very helpful, since we are going to see that sometimes it's allowed by the policy like this, a big number, or even though the deny policy ID 0 is going to be applied. Remember that the policy ID 0 is the one that is implicit on the firewall connections, and it's the last policy ID. But in this case, I just want to emphasize that it is not important, or well, at least this is not going to be very helpful to do the troubleshooting, since we are talking about explicit proxy and not IPv4 connections. Then I explain how to check the what session list. This command will be very helpful to identify the number of policy on the explicit proxy rules that will be matching on the connection of the user. And then I explain the difference of IPv4 session list and the what session explicit proxy list, no, in this case. And also explain these commands that can be summarized or can be identified the information as faster as we can. Also, we talk about identified how or where is the connection through. Sometimes the source is not directly connected to the Fortigate, but we can see that sometimes the Fortigate sends the packet to another layer 3 device. On this case, we can see that this is directly connected through port 1. So we expect that the local area network is directly connected. But sometimes on the cases are through another device of layer 3, and this can affect on the connection, okay? Then I mentioned that it is important to check the configuration not only of a proxy policy, but also from web proxy explicit or web proxy global. It is important because sometimes customer inherits or receives the administration of the company or the TI devices, equipments, and the guy sometimes doesn't know what the other administrators do or did in this case, and that is important to identify, to check the configuration on the web proxy explicit. For example, here we can see and we can identify that this is the source, the port of the explicit proxy. Sometimes customer is trying to connect, for example, to the port 3118 when the port is 8080. I mean, that would be a very easy troubleshoot to identify the port is not connected, but sometimes when we go to the hardest troubleshooting, maybe we can ignore even though the basic things, okay? Then I explain the difference, or I do emphasize on the debug information. As you know, on firmware version 5.6, it changed a little bit some comments. I explain a little bit of this, and we are going to be talking about what the book show, the book console timestamp, especially this is going to be the important, the debug enable category policy, and on the other hand, we are going to see the debug enable category HTTP. Last but not less important, we are going to be checking the connections using the sniffer. As you can remember, it is important to consider that the connections that are from the local area network is going to be from the PC, source PC, to the destination. That is going to be according to the port that you have configured on Explicit Proxy. On this case is 8080, and when we go to see the connection leaving the Fortigate, we cannot identify the same port, obviously, because the connections are, for example, for HTTPS or HTTP. So even though that it's going to be more difficult to troubleshoot, because that information, if it is the HTTPS, it is going to be encrypted. Or the other thing is that sometimes the one interface is the destination or is the same interface that not only the Explicit Proxy interface is going to be using, but also all the networks, the VLAN networks or another interfaces is going to take or are going to take to leave internet. So that we need to consider, no? It is easier to identify the connections from the PC to the Fortigate and the Fortigate to the destination. It is going to be a little bit harder, but let's continue. And also, we are going to see this is not the number 4, this is 060. 60L 60L to do a conversation from the TXT file to PCAP file. And at the end, I mentioned the importance of different websites that can be very helpful to do that troubleshooting, not only on this. Okay, so let's start. We are going to go directly to the connection of the lab environment. In this case, we can talk about this. This is our virtual machine. We are using here the firmware version 5.6.3. As we could see the diagram, here is the diagram. We are going to check about only the normal. Well, this is going to be a little bit helpful. Okay. We have on the network interface this interface is the port number 1, 2.253/24, and the port 2 is the internet, is the 5.95. Then we can see the PC that we have here is this one. Let's check the IP address, 10.0.2.131, as we can see here, and the gateway is 253. Okay, perfect. Now, what is the first step to enable troubleshooting or to enable Explicit Proxy? Well, first of all, we need to confirm that we have enabled on system. Let's go to system. Feature is going to be here, and we need to confirm that Explicit Proxy is enabled. Once it is enabled, the option here for Proxy Explicit is going to be enabled, but this is going to be for the policies. You can check the basic configuration here on network, Explicit Proxy, and you are going to see the port, for example, the HTTP port, and where it is going to be listened to that connection. On this case, if we add the LAN port 1, we are going to be able to activate this option through the GUI interface, the enable explicit proxy. What happens if we go, for example, to the number port 4, we are going not to have that option. Oh, okay, that is because we have already configured the system, and if we do okay, we will suppose that on explicit proxy it is going to be listen to LAN 1 to port 1 and in the port 4. Okay, so we can add it whether the interface or the explicit proxy option. Okay, perfect. Now let's deactivate the IPv4. The IPv4, these are deactivated, and the explicit proxy is enabled, the option number 1. Now I am going to disable it. I am going to enable this one and disable this other, and I am going to try to connect to internet using the Chrome browser, but I am not going to configure any feature of explicit proxy. Okay, we disable the feature, and then I will enable the IPv4. This behavior is to understand that what is happening. Sometimes customer can say, oh my god, user is getting access to, I don't know, maybe Microsoft Office, or it's getting access to YouTube or Facebook, but we said that in the explicit proxy it is not allowed. Suppose that we have here a web filter or application control. What it is going to be happening? Sometimes the policy or IPv4 can be enabled that feature. Now we don't have configured the proxy here on the web browser. Now if we try to navigate, we are going to have access. Okay, that is very important to identify. If IPv4 policy is giving internet access, or on this case it is going through the explicit proxy. So it is very important to identify. I mean, on this case we have two policies and we have only one activated. But what would happen if the customer, the client, has about 200 policies? Sometimes it is very difficult to try to identify all the policies, and more, it is more complicated, or it is hardest when there are some policies that enable, for example, in the first one activate the DNS, the second one activate the HTTP, the third one activate the HTTPS. I mean, all the services are distributed on different policies. We disable the IPv4, and we confirm that we don't have access to, for example, any other website. For example, let's try to enter to facebook.com, and we are going to see that it is not enabled anymore. Now, proxy policy should permit that connection. We are going to activate the explicit proxy feature, going through configuration. We search for explicit proxy, and then confirm that we have the same IP address. We accept, and now we can see that we can go to facebook.com or any site, because we are using now explicit proxy. But how to identify that we are using explicit proxy? Well, that is some part of the troubleshooting steps. On this case, we have already confirmed that the first step is to check that the configuration of the web browsers are okay. Perfect. Now the second step or to troubleshoot the connections is to use the get system session list. On this case, we can identify, for example, get system session list. If we don't put any grep filter, we are going to see all the connections. I emphasize that this is a lab environment and we have only one PC trying to connect to YouTube or to Google, but we don't have any other servers or email servers or HTTP websites, DNS, or another connections from the databases. Okay, so we are going to see a very small session list. Okay, but we are going to see the different connections. For example, the source IP, destination, for example, trying to connect to Google from the DNS, but as we can see here, it has the source NAT, the destination, and destination NAT. And if we want to do a special filter, we can set that, for example, get system session list grep, and then we are going to set 10.0.2.131. In this case, we see that there is only one connection active. To generate more traffic, we are going to go to YouTube, and we are going to do we are going to search for live stream. Let's check which live stream is available. Let's check this one from the NASA, from the space. So that's such a beautiful picture. But well, we see that, for example, now we can see different connections. Look this is TCP, even though the connections, we are using HTTPS connections over HTTP, but basically the connections are through the TCP, through UDP. What is going to be happening if we do the different grep filter? In this case, we see different UDP packets. On this case, we need to remember, well, in this case, it's about DNS, and sometimes it can be useful to identify the TCP or the UDP, but basically, this is what we are talking about, to identify that we can do a filter on the connections above all the possibles that sometimes are more than 1,000 session options. Okay, the second one, and I think that this would be related, for example, to the get routing details, get router info routing details. It would be to check the DNS IP/RP list. Sometimes it would be very helpful to see which is the MAC address that we see through the Fortigate. In this case, we have only 1.2. We can do also the grep filter. In this case, we said, okay, what is the MAC address of the PC.0.2.131? We see that this is the MAC address, and part of the troubleshooting is go to the PC and check if this is if this corresponds to that MAC address, no? Okay, and we can see here that it matches 02 CE 50. That's all. Now, the next step to do a troubleshooting is to check the information about how to look forward on the online help. What would be happening if we want to troubleshoot this information on the FortiView? We would go to the FortiView, and then we click on sources, the destination, the application, websites, and we don't see any traffic. And what would be happening? The recommendation here is always to look forward the documentation on help.fortinet.com. At the end, we are going to see the different documentation sources that we can check. But basically, we can see here, we can see on this website that it is important to enable the logdisk setting. I am not going to read all of this, but basically we need to enable the logdisk settings, and you say, okay, config logdisk settings, then you set show full, and you see that it is enabled. Perfect. So what is happening? And it says only certain Fortigate models support this login. Refer to the FortiView feature support platformatics. And on this case, if we try to identify the virtual machine, we are going to find that there is no support for virtual machines trying to log on the disk. Okay, these are the only models that support that version, and according to this information, that's why we don't see any feature or any logs on the FortiView section. And that would be very important on any troubleshooting, not only for this. Okay. After that, also I explained the importance of the show full, and the command of tree. Sometimes when we are configuring some features, for example, web proxy, and then we go to the profile, the explicit, we can do show. The show feature only show us the things that had been modified from the original state. Then if we set show full, we are going to see all the possible features that can be enabled. But what happens if, for example, this is desactivated? If this is desactivated and we then activate it, sometimes, I am just putting an example, sometimes when we enable and we do again show full, it is activated the other feature. But with the command tree, we can identify all possible connections. Here on this slide, I try to compare the show full versus the tree. As you can see, there is about, for example, 8 options additional. And basically, the options that are additionally is the pack file. On this case, we can identify that the pack file is disabled here. Here, for example, pack file server status disabled. So that's why we cannot see more information about the options of pack. So this is important to check, not to troubleshoot, but sometimes to activate some feature or to configure a new option that we need to add on the implementation, on the configuration of something. This is basically, for example, we could go to the config user group, for example. We see show, okay, perfect, show full, okay, and let's for example enter to the guest group, for example, edit, guest group, show. There is only one option, show full. There is 2, 4, and the 5. The command tree, there is more than 5, okay. And we need to investigate according to the slide that we were talking about. Here is the content, but all the informations are on the websites that we can find on the source that I am going to give you at the end of the video. Then we continue to check the commands with the debug flow. Here, as you can see, it's not going to be very helpful if we try to identify the connection using the debug flow. Why? Because it is not the same to identify the connections that add through the IPv4 and when we try to see it through the explicit proxy. On this case, we are going to see that, or at least what we expect, is to see that any connections are successful through a valid policy. Okay, Remember that we are generating traffic from the video. We are going to deactivate the debug flow, diagnose debug disable, enter. And for example, if we try to check the policy, in this case, for example, we can see, let's confirm the one that it's in the beginning, the ID 1593. It finishes where? It finishes until here. And we can check that it is the 2.132 trying to connect to some type of broadcast. So we don't want to analyze this connection. Let's check. Let's find another one. Here, for example, policy. This is the ID 1589, 81. And the source is the PC and it's trying to connect to this port. Okay. And if we try to identify the policy, obviously that policy doesn't exist. And something like that would be finding on all the connections. So that would not be very helpful for us because we want to identify which policy is trying to connect, and we are not going to check it through this one. So we are not going to see any valid traffic using the debug flow as on the troubleshooting on IPv4 policies. For that, we use the WAT session list. It has been changing a little bit the commands of the WAT, or in this case from the explicit proxy, but basically are the same. Okay, let's confirm why. Okay, in this case, we can check diagnose WAT session list, and we are going to see all the connections. This is one section on the information that we can consider or we can talk about important. It would be the firewall policy ID, and this is we are going to be talking about explicit proxy, not the IPv4, and we are going to see the connections through the IP address. And here we are going to set the SSL disabled, from the to client to server, and that all information. Okay, now I want to introduce, or I want to talk about the commands of grep before, after, and central, as we could say. For example, if we do the before 2 lines, the policy 2, we want to search on all this information that the Fortigate sent us. I only want to see 2 lines before we see the policy equal to 2. Okay, this would be the policy equal to 2. This will be matching. So I want to see 1 line and 2 lines. The second line, it's going to be, there is not going to be anything. So let's confirm that. Grep b2 before 2 lines, policy equal to, and we are going to see here 1 and 2. The number 2 is empty. If we use before 3, we are going to see until, for example, here where it says bytes. Okay, 1 2 3, 1 2 3, and the same happens for after. If we said, okay, show me after 2 lines, if we show after 2 lines is 1 and 2. If we set the after 3, it shows that. That would be very interesting. And if we use central, it will show us after and before, after and before 3. Just set the 2. Okay, this is the policy 1 2, and this is 1 2. Okay, and that would be very helpful to identify some configuration. For example, if we set show full configuration, I don't know, FCCO, no, firewall policy, and we said okay, grep after 2, edit 1, simple quote, we can see that 10, okay, 15, okay. We want to see the 5 lines after and before. There is no information on there before edit 1. Let's confirm this. Before 5. There is nothing else. And that would be very helpful. And the other thing is to compare the sessions that are through the explicit proxy and the IPv4. Sometimes when we want to check the policy that have already matched on the IPv4 connections, we put the command diagnose sys session list sys session filter and source 10.0.2.131, and then we set it with diagnose sys session list grep policy underline ID, and we can check the policies that it is supposed to be connected, but obviously that those policies doesn't exist. And if we put the correct command, we can check the policy that is correctly matching through the Fortigate. For this, we are going to set diagnose what session list, and we are going to set a grep policy, and we can see it is matching with policy number 2. Let's confirm if it is correct. Policy ID number 2 is matching. What would happen if I disable this policy and then I enable the policy ID number 1? Well, first of all, the recommendation would be to clear the session. We need to kill them. Diagnose sys session clear. We have already the filter for that PC especially, and we see again the policy, and now we identify that the connections are through the policy number 1 and would be different to this one. Okay, that is the difference. Diagnose what is session list versus diagnosis what list. We need to confirm, and we need to remember that sometimes the commands can be different from version to version. Maybe these commands would be not useful in 5.4 or in 5.2, but let's confirm, and we create this video to emphasize on the last firmware version of the actual Fortigate, no? The last one is the 5.6.3. The first step, well, is the information of get router info routing table, just to discard that there is no another device. Sometimes customer is connecting this PC through another device, so maybe, I don't know, I think that there is maybe here a router and the connections is through this local area network or this point-to-point connection. The source is going to be connected to the gateway is sent it to the Fortigate, and if we want to identify it, we can see it here as a static route or the dynamic route, and we are going to see that important information. So we set get router info routing all to check the general table routing, and if we want to see a specific routing connection, we said, okay, where do you see the 10.0.2.131? It is directly connected to the port 1, so that would be any problem at least in this case. And obviously we can put the diagnose IPRP list. Okay, and that was the information. I think this is very clear. Show firewall proxy. We need to check the configurations. Here, for example, sometimes we can identify that some has the web filter activated and all other stuff like that. And we can say that what would happening if this connection would be using, for example, I don't know, security profiles of web filter. Let's imagine that this policy is using the, okay, I can use it here. For example, the web filter, it's monitor all. We have the certificate type inspection, the default, and then we see again the policies. We can identify that the policy number 2 has UTM profiles. We need to have that clear, because what would be happening if the connections are not successfully when we are using any UTM profile, but eliminating the UTM profile, it is successful. So if that happened, we would say that the problem is the UTM profile, obviously, no? We should identify the categories, the web filter overrides, the application control overrides, or any features related to that options, okay? But what would happen if we are using the explicit proxy without any security profiles, and nevertheless the connections, what would happen if we are using the policy without any features, but we don't see any successful connection? The option here would be to connect the same IP address here, the IP address that is connected through the explicit proxy, but the ideal option would be to set it as IPv4 connection, just to confirm that the source connection is not having problems. Or even though the best option is to use this network connection to a PC to check that there is no problems that sometimes can be in a black or white list, and maybe this connection, maybe this server is having protection through blacklist IP address, and that would be an idea, no, to how to troubleshoot that. Okay, and after that, here we can check the firewall policy, and as I was saying, the config web proxy explicit, then we see the show full, and then also we need to confirm the web proxy global to check the configuration that had been modified, no, from the beginning, and compare it with another ones that are working. And another thing very helpful is the diagnose the book information. As you can see here, diagnose the book info, there is more information than on the previous versions. Okay, we are going to set these options to troubleshoot the policy that is matching. It would be equivalent to the book flow. Okay, so we said diagnose what show, just to confirm what are the versions or what are the diagnose what the book show. The category is not set, the level info is, the level is info, and the display PID process is disabled. We are going to enable the timestamp just to check the time. Diagnose the book console, timestamp enable, and it is the more important command. Diagnose the book enable category diagnose what the book diagnose what the book enable category policy. We can check again. Here is policy, and then we activate the book diagnose what console log enable, and after that we set diagnose debug enable, and we are going to see the different connections through the firewall policy. On this case, as we can see, we are identifying that the port connections are through the policy number. Let's confirm. Where can we see it here? Here is the policy number 1, policy ID number 1, and we can see the connections. It would be something equivalent to the debug flow. Okay, we can check that the URL file is some kind of treat. What would happen if I disable it here, disable, and enable this one? We expect to check policy denied, obviously, because it's not matching with anyone. And after that, we can see the policy number 2. Okay, and perfect. Now we want to check diagnose. Okay, diagnose debug disable, and we want to check, for example, the other option, the category HTTP. Diagnose debug, diagnose what debug enable category HTTP. We check the debug show. Okay, category, let's see, all, and then HTTP show. Okay, only HTTP, diagnose debug enable, and what we are going to see here, okay, is the different connections. I'm going to do diagnose debug disable, diagnose debug disable, and here, for example, we can see the different hosts. In this case, this is the connection, DNS request, manifest Google video, clients for .google.com. As you know, for example, servers, Skype servers, Microsoft Office 365 services, the YouTube content, the Facebook content, or any other websites has a lot of dynamic content, so we'll be watching some information like this, not exactly the URL, but something like not directly the website. What would happen if, for example, if I try to navigate, I will stop this connection. I want to enable again, diagnose debug enable. And what happens if we navigate to vancomer.com, diagnose debug disable? We can check here. Well, it was looking on Google, and it can be possible. Here we have information on, let's just check, VA Vancomer.b3.cs, and that information that will be the connections that we are going to see, the connect, the host, the user agent that we are using, and on that we can check that the connection is done perfectly, at least on the local area network. And let's continue with the steps of troubleshooting. Then after that is to confirm the diagnose sniffer, what it is happening through the connections. Diagnose sniffer packet any host 10.0.2 and port 8080. Then we set 4 to check the port interface that it's getting through and getting access in both directions, in and out. Obviously, the encryption, the connection is not encrypted. What would be happening if we try to identify the connections on the pickup file? Here we are going to see that the pickup file is in plain text. If we try to see the port 443, obviously we are going to see that connections as the encrypted. Also, we can check the other side, for example, port 43, sorry. And that would be the connections. Sometimes it is that difficult and more difficult to troubleshoot on the one side, but these are the options. And after that, just before to finish, we are going to see faster how to convert the diagnose debug, the sniffer using 06 slide. We are going to save the connection. It will be depending on the program that we will using. Let's save it in LAN 3, and we are going to set 60L, and let's navigate to Vancomer. That's all. We said quit, and then we need to open a CMD using this tool. We are going to change to this directory, cd, change directory, paste, and then we are going to say Fortigate the input. Okay, let's share, or let's put the information that we download. In this case is the LAN tree. Let's change the format to txt file. It is recommended. LAN tree, input LAN tree, and the output, I am going to call it LAN tree, but pcap LAN tree dot pcap file. Then we wait. LAN tree pcap file. We open it and we can check it here. It is to go further on the troubleshooting analysis. This will be very helpful to go further. I mean, that will be very interesting to check. I prefer to quit the packet bytes to have more information on this, even if I want to open this information. And we are going to see different connections. This would be very easy to check. And after that, proxy connection, no? And when we want to identify the connection on the one side, the most common problems that can have sometimes are about the certificates, the compatible certificates. But I mean, that would be another troubleshooting process. In this case, we are only trying to identify the explicit proxy, but that is an interesting feature to analyze the connection using the SSL profile or the SSL protocol. And just to finish, this is the last part, just to tell you that are different sites that will help you to troubleshoot faster. On this case are the different CLI websites. I am going to start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, like that. Okay, this is the number, the 5.2 features, the 5.4 CLI, the 5.4, the 5.6 CLI. After that, we can see the KBs. We can check the list. We can find a lot of information. Then after that, we can see the book or the command line on help, the Fortigate help online. It is very important to check all of them. Then we have the version 5.4. Then we see the version 5.6. After that, I am going to go through the docs document. From the Fortigate, there is a lot of the information on the PDF files, on the version. Here it is almost ready, the version 6.0, but at this moment we can find information of 5.6, 5.4, 5.2, 5.0, and even so the older information. There is a lot of content here. There is a lot of content, and that would be very helpful, very helpful. Okay. And also we have the videos, the video docs Fortinet. In this case are full content of information. This is basically the fastest configuration, but it is not, it doesn't go beyond to that. I mean, it only explains about how it could be easy to configure something, but it not goes through the troubleshooting process, for example. And if they talk about troubleshooting, it is not enough to go further, no? And the last option is here that I just wanted to invite you to check the new features on the 5.6, because there are a lot of information here that are modifying. I mean, it would be very helpful, but for example, it called my attention to the diagnose diagnosis 1 info. For example, it tells you directly the connections diagnosis info. You see 1 info. No, your IP address, your location, and something like that. Okay, and I mean that would be everything. I tried to go the fastest as I could, but as you can see, the video takes almost 1 hour. But I think that this helps you to have it clear on taking explicit proxy issues or tickets, and it can help you about to understand the types of proxy and especially the the browser settings. That would be everything. Have a great day, and we see us on the next video.